This is Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of one of the most powerful and influential dynasties in the world. Despite making some reforms in the country and claiming openness and modernity, he uses coercion and deadly means to silence dissidents and impose fear.
The people who are arrested are not even being dissidents.
These were the thought makers, the opinion makers.
Mohammed was one of these people who criticized him. Salman al-Auda, he's a cleric, he was silent.
From placing his own mother under house arrest and detaining a brother of the king, a former crown prince and a cousin, to executing journalists and kidnapping other countries' leaders. This is the cruel rise and the many crimes of Mohammed bin Salman. In December 2014, the world was awaiting the death of King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz al-Saud of Arabia's third al-Saud dynasty. He slowly faded away in a hospital bed in a desert outside Riyadh. His father, Abdulaziz, had founded the Kingdom of Arabia, which he conquered on camelback. Saudi Arabia itself was only 83 years old. The 90-year-old king was older. Abdullah assumed the throne in 2005, but ruling the kingdom presented a heavy burden for him. He had spent his life smoking and eating fancy meals, and he developed diabetes and heart disease. His health started drastically deteriorating after he underwent several surgeries in 2010. Abdullah's brother was Salman bin Abdulaziz al-Saud, and unlike all other sons of King Abdulaziz, Salman did not care that much about wealth. He spent most of his royal money on his children and wives. Salman had 6 sons with his first wife, and he also had 6 sons with his second wife. The first one, Mohammed bin Salman, also known as MBS, was born in 1985. In January 2015, King Abdullah died of cancer, and Salman ascended the throne. Salman had not been close to his first 6 sons, and it was Mohammed who became the crown prince and the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia. And in just 3 years, MBS was able to silence nearly all voices of dissent and anyone who formed a threat to his throne.
Mohammed bin Salman ordered the arrest of powerful princes, ministers, and investors. Some are his rivals in the royal family.
We're seeing a truly historic upheaval unfold right now.
A royal purge in Saudi Arabia. King Salman ordered the creation of a new anti-corruption committee headed by his son, Prince Mohammed Salman.
Well, Mohammed bin Salman has pushed through a series of controversial policies and decisions since he became crown prince. He launched what he called an anti-corruption purge in 2017, detaining dozens of princes and business leaders at the Ritz-Carlton in Riyadh. Many were freed after turning over large parts of their wealth.
Over 20 princes, officials, and army officers had been arrested in an attempt from MBS to tighten his grip on the throne even further, including Prince Ahmed bin Abdulaziz al-Saud, a brother of King Salman, the monarch's nephew, Prince Mohammed bin Nayef, who were accused of treason and taken from their homes by black-clad royal guards. The Saudi royal court has accused the 2 men, once potential contenders for the throne, of plotting a coup to unseat the king and crown prince.
In 2018, Prince Ahmed returned to the kingdom just weeks after he appeared to criticize the Saudi leadership during a protest against the Saudi-UAE war in Yemen.
What does the whole of the Al Saud family have to do with this? There are certain individuals responsible: the king, the crown prince, and others in the state.
But it didn't stop there. MBS led crackdowns on clerics, bloggers, journalists, and women's rights activists. Mohammed had less patience for Shia dissidents than all his royal predecessors. He especially hates those who doubt the al-Saud dynasty's legitimacy. That's why, in January 2016, Shia cleric Nimr al-Nimr was executed in the Riyadh square, alongside 47 other Shias. Their execution sparked public criticism and outrage.
Protests have erupted across the Middle East after Saudi Arabia executed prominent Shia religious leader Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, along with 46 others Saturday, in the country's largest mass execution in decades. The Saudi government accused Nimr of calling for the overthrow of the Saudi royal family. He'd been arrested multiple times, including in 2012, after he was involved in protests after the Arab Spring uprising.
An official even claimed the cleric physically threatened the crown prince, but his real crime was simply criticizing the Saudi regime. On the surface, though, the crown prince managed to convince the international community that he was the reformer that Saudi Arabia had been awaiting for decades. Yet inside Saudi Arabia, many realized that Nimr's execution delivered a clear message: that Mohammed was leaving some things unchanged, and one of them was that people who doubted his family's legitimacy to rule would lose their lives. But that was just the beginning. In 2017, Prince Mohammed made a daring foreign policy move by kidnapping Saad Hariri, Lebanon's prime minister, and forcing him to resign.
For 13 days, the Lebanese people have waited for a decision for a political solution that would stop the deterioration. Today, I will not hide it from you. I have reached a dead end.
Saad had never made any public comments on the matter. The kidnapping created a geopolitical crisis, and Saad was allegedly scolded and beaten. Mohammed created a new kind of instability, and everything was happening publicly. Saad was the leader of the biggest Sunni party in Lebanon, called the Future Movement. He headed the government of a faltering country where Iran supported Hezbollah and Christian parties fought for power. Lebanon, which was a former French colony, maintained close ties with France. Thus, French President Emmanuel Macron, who had been in office only for a few months, felt it was his duty to act on the global stage and get Saad back home. On November 4, 2017, Macron paid an unscheduled visit to Saudi Arabia. The situation was politically precarious, especially because Lebanon shares borders with Syria, where an ongoing war had resulted in the displacement of millions of refugees who settled in Lebanon. Also, Hezbollah often initiated conflicts with Israel from Lebanon's southern borders. If Saad's government broke down, violence might ensue. Global leaders regarded Saad's situation as a political issue and believed that Mohammed was trying to destabilize Lebanon as part of Saudi Arabia's proxy war against Iran. MBS kept bombing Yemen to break its Iran-backed Houthis, rebels who marched across Yemen and seized one region after another with military support from Iran, while exerting power over Lebanon to weaken the Shia Islamist political party Hezbollah. Macron couldn't do anything to help Saad in Saudi Arabia, so he left and thought of a better plan, as Mohammed publicly denied that he was detaining Saad.
I just want to conclude with one thing. Prime Minister Saad is going to be here for 2 days, so please know that he is kidnapped.
On November 15, Macron publicly invited Saad and his entire family to Paris in an attempt to corner Mohammed, embarrass him in front of the international community, and force him to release Saad. Upon his return to Lebanon, Saad revoked his resignation. Mohammed looked weaker and Hezbollah stronger. This is Jamal Khashoggi, a Saudi journalist and commentator. He'd been a spokesman for the embassies of Saudi Arabia in London and Washington, D.C. after the 9/11 attacks. Yet, Khashoggi often opposed the royal court and handled very sensitive topics, openly discussing them with enemies of the royal family.
Prince Mohammed bin Salman is promising to eradicate extremism in Saudi Arabia, and we need that. And he is promising to eradicate corruption, and we need that. But he's doing all of those positive things in the midst of silencing other opinions.
Prince Mohammed adopted the same tough approach with him. He could not be a loyal critic of the royal family. He had to choose between fully supporting the crown prince or being his enemy. He'd also become a national security threat to the royal court because of his ties to Turkish politicians and his work on behalf of democracy in Saudi Arabia. So Saad al-Qahtani, the prince's deputy, tried neutralizing Khashoggi.
I received a call from Saud al-Qahtani saying that I have instructions from above that you should not do anything from now on. Don't tweet, don't write, don't do anything.
I was ordered to shut up.
But nothing could silence him, so Mohammed had to use coercion. Eventually, Khashoggi moved to the United States as he no longer felt safe at home.
Jamal called me. He said, I am suffocated in Saudi Arabia.
By 2018, Jamal Khashoggi had been criticizing MBS for 2 years. He felt lonely after a divorce and missed his children who stayed in Saudi Arabia.
He told me that he had moved to the US and that he was all alone and didn't know what was happening for the first time in his life at age 60. I remember he started tearing up, telling me how his wife, whom he had loved very, very much, she wasn't okay with it. Nobody was, his kids weren't okay with it. Nobody was okay with it. Everything was left behind. Family, country, 60 years of his life, everything.
He and his Turkish fiancée were planning to get married soon. So, on October 2nd, he landed in Turkey and decided to visit the Saudi consulate in Istanbul to get some documents necessary for his marriage process. He arrived at the consulate at 1:14 p.m. accompanied by his fiancée. Security cameras showed Khashoggi entering the secluded consulate building, but he never got out. And his fiancée was still waiting for him until after 1 a.m. While Khashoggi had been assured by Saudi officials that he would be safe inside the consulate's walls, details later emerged, pieced together through recording and other evidence gathered by Turkish authorities, that described how a team of Saudi agents who had arrived in Istanbul on state-owned planes for the intended purpose of killing the journalist, subdued, killed, and then dismembered Khashoggi using a bone saw. In one recording, a close ally of Prince Mohammed referred to the journalist as a sacrificial victim. Mustafa al-Madani, a heavy-set intelligence operative, dressed in Khashoggi's clothing and glasses and fake beard, and left the Saudi embassy through the back door.
We saved some particularly damning piece of the puzzle, like Saudi body double for maximum effect.
O kişiyi dublör olarak kullandılar. Orada o kişiyi dublör olarak.
U.S. intelligence agencies concluded in a declassified intelligence report that Saudi Crown Prince approved the murder of the Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi.
Ülkeleri verdik. Suudi Arabistan'a da verdik. Amerika'ya da verdik. Almanlara, Fransızlara, İngilizlere. Hepsine verdik.
But Washington stopped short of targeting the future Saudi king with financial or other sanctions. Trump defended and brushed aside the findings of his own intelligence agencies even after it became widely known through media reports that the CIA had concluded with a medium to high degree of confidence that Prince Mohammed had approved the murder.
If the Crown Prince went in front of a jury, he would be convicted in 30 minutes.
Of murder?
Yes.
They're buying hundreds of billions of dollars worth of things from this country. I'm not going to destroy the economy for our country by being foolish with Saudi Arabia.
He told me that he had nothing to do with it.
So what if he's wrong?
As recently as a few days ago.
Do you just live with it because you need him?
Well, will anybody really know? All right, will anybody really know?
The king firmly denied any knowledge of it. I don't want to get into his mind, but it sounded to me like maybe these could have been rogue killers. Who knows?
Trump was reported to have bragged to the Washington Post reporter Bob Woodward that he had protected the Crown Prince from congressional scrutiny, telling Woodward, "I saved his ass." It's always a shock to know that a government killed a dissident, but what made Khashoggi's case spark global outrage was the horrendous brutality of the killers, who cold-heartedly dismembered their victim's body like that of an animal.
Yani hala inanamıyorum olanların bu kadar trajik olmasına ve dünyanın hala bu konuyla ilgili hiçbir şey yapamamış olmasına hala inanamıyorum.
Saudi denial added fuel to the fire.
Did you order the murder of Jamal Khashoggi?
بلا شك لا.
Absolutely not. This was a heinous crime. Some think that I should know what 3 million people working for the Saudi government do daily. It's impossible that the 3 million would send their daily reports to the leader or the second highest person in the Saudi government.
Saudi officials believed all that public criticism was unfair. They argued that Khashoggi had been a traitor, a saboteur, and a defector.
Are the core of all problems.
2 months after the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, in December 2018, Saudi Arabia hosted a Formula E race to show that the world and international community had not turned their back on the kingdom. After all forms of public entertainment had been prohibited in Riyadh for several decades, the event presented a milestone in the prince's attempts to reinvent the Saudi economy and society. Foreign celebrities and dignitaries attended, and Enrique Iglesias even performed that day. Meanwhile, Mohammed's business contacts saw that his power emanated from his family and did not depend on elections or global approval. He was young, with a chance to rule the kingdom for decades. They regarded his murder of Khashoggi as a simple, one-time misstep from his early career that would soon be forgotten among his wide-ranging reforms and innovations. He even ordered the Aramco IPO to be held on the Saudi stock exchange, despite advisors warning against it. The IPO raised $25.6 billion at a valuation of $1.7 trillion. Mohammed bin Salman didn't get to ring the bell at the New York Stock Exchange, but he managed to pull off the biggest IPO of any company in history. In 2020, Mohammed got an unexpected boost from the coronavirus pandemic. His power over the price of oil became even more important during a world recession, and his critics largely went silent amid an outpouring of support for the nation in a time of crisis. It seemed clear that he would have plenty of time and opportunity to mold the country as he wished.